Hi y'all, I'm Mark McElroy, and on this channel I talk about the tools and techniques I'm using to change my work and life for the better. Today we're talking about PKM, or personal knowledge management tools, and in particular if you're somebody that's using LogSec or Rome Research or Obsidian, you may already be aware that there's an audience to be made by taking up a contrarian view to basically say that, oh, all of these PKM tools, they're just flashes in the pans, they're fads, they're going to pass away. Or lately, and more specifically, to say that one element of them, the knowledge graph, that visual representation of how the different ideas in your note-taking system are connected and fit together, that just is a kind of eye candy that really has no purpose in terms of helping you understand the information that you work with. Those arguments typically go like this. One of the first and most popular ones says that as your graph grows, it becomes less and less useful because it basically becomes a tangled mess of points and lines that's difficult to navigate and use. And I confess that there are some tools like Rome Research where I think this is very much the case. It's one of those reasons that I started in Rome and moved on to Obsidian. Another line of reasoning says that really, the graphs are just about bragging rights, that people want to be able to hold up their graphs and say, look at me, look at how complex and connected my web of knowledge is. My graph is bigger and more complex than yours. While that might be the case in some people's minds, I've actually never met anyone that sort of thinks their graph has to go into a graphing pageant. They like to share what they've done so far so that others can see that system growing, and they may take pride in how that system is growing. I've not really seen this kind of competition in the communities that I work with. Another criticism takes what's often used as a positive of the graph, that it works the way your mind does, that is, relationally, is spun into a negative idea, that your mind is already a kind of scattered connection of bits and bobs tied together with twine, and that the graph just replicates that digitally. What good does that do you? But I think the most egregious and surprising of these arguments is the one that essentially says, structured outlines have kind of been behind 99% of mankind's greatest documents ever written. And to think that something like a knowledge graph is going to supplant that is silly, so you just need to get back to thinking in a linear fashion. If you take that logic to its logical end, you'd say things like, there's no use to use email to write anybody because 99% of human correspondence over the centuries has been in the form of pen and paper. Or even to say, why use computers since for centuries we got by without them? It just doesn't hold up logically. I think it's a silly thing for somebody to say. A lot of these viewpoints really deeply misunderstand the nature of the graph and how it works in a PKM tool like Obsidian. The fact is, the graph isn't unstructured. As we work with our notes, we are adding structure to the graph. Every time we make a link between notes, we're imposing structure. Every time we tag a note, we're imposing structure. The difference is that this is not the kind of structure you see in a lot of note-taking tools. Remember Evernote? They said you could never forget it. All I remember about Evernote is that for a long time, it was an anything box for me, and I threw every note I ever took in it. The problem was, I never really got anything back out. So it's not that sort of messy anything goes structure. It's also not the structure that people apply when they like to use files and folders. That's a structure that creates a lot of friction, by the way, because before you can file something that you've written up, you have to think about exactly what folder it needs to go into. And if there's not a folder that's great for that, you have to come up with another folder, add that to your hierarchy, and on it goes. The difference in the graph and these more traditional ways of organizing information is that the graph depends on emergent structure. It's a structure that comes about not because of intention, but because you're paying attention to what goes into your database. Nature loves emergent structure. Think about a colony of ants. There is no central ant calling the shots. Ants don't work from blueprints, but over time, really elaborate and beneficial and beautiful things emerge as a result of that emergent structure at work within the colony. That said, let's get one thing straight. We're not saying here that emergent structure is better than intentional structure, or that the two have to be used in opposition to each other. In fact, they complement each other really well. When you start with an emergent structure, let's say you're using a nonlinear process to generate a lot of ideas, You can't just share that mess of ideas in a big basket to people and expect them to sort it out. So after you work with emergent structure or after you work with nonlinear thinking, you have to apply some structure to put that into a format that you can share easily with others. That's the secret of the graph. It is a visual representation of all the information in your database, but it is also a way of exploring that information without the restrictions of linearity. You can cruise through it, you can jump from node to node, you can look for visual maps of how meaning comes together, and that may get you to consider information you've captured in ways that you wouldn't if they were just filed away neatly in folders. Let's talk about the ways my graph has helped me. One of the ways it's helped is it's made it easier for me to identify topics that have a growing collection of notes being assembled around them. This makes it in turn easy for me to pick out topics where I really need to sit down and create what Nick Milo calls an MOC or map of content. I keep an eye on the graph, and when I see a collection of nodes growing around a hub of an idea, I use that to say, okay, it's probably time for me to create a map of content about that topic. Now, has my graph revealed to me topics that I didn't know I was interested in? Well, no, because as I take notes on certain topics, I always link them or tag them with the domain, the area of interest or category of interest that I'm following over time that's appropriate. So I'm aware of the things I'm tracking and writing about and making notes on. But one thing the graph can do is draw my attention to domains that are larger and more influential on my thinking than I would have ever expected. For example, faith. Prowling around my graph, I saw this huge constellation around the concept of faith, and it turns out that's the second largest domain in terms of all the domains that I'm tracking, following, and making notes around. I haven't written much of anything about faith or the role that faith has played in my life and how that faith has changed over time. The graph sort of helped me realize that that's a place I need to focus. Not a surprise that that topic was there, but I was surprised at its degree of influence. And the graph revealed that degree of influence far better than a series of folders stuffed with documents could have. So now finally, how can the graph help you? Well, first, sort of like what I've been describing, as you prowl through your graph, you start to notice these little constellations of ideas, and the graph can sort of draw your attention to where you're spending your intellectual time. What kind of things are you taking notes about? What domains or themes or categories are you following? The graph makes that visually apparent in very short order. Your graph can also point you to the books and authors you should be sharing with others. You start prowling through your graph and you notice, hey, here's a little hub around Kim Stanley Robinson and all the books of his that I've read and all the notes about those books. I've never written or shared anything about Kim Stanley Robinson. Maybe I should. In a nutshell, the real power of the graph is to get your ideas out of your head and onto the screen so that you can think about them from a more objective perspective. And having done that, then, you begin to imagine really effective ways that that information could be structured and shared. With the tools and techniques I'm using to do my best work and build my best life, I'm Mark McElroy. We'll see y'all.